This is a tutorial on the political history of the European Union. Historically, there have been there is a long history of dreams of European unity. We can go back to the Roman Empire, which is a really obvious example. But even after that, there have been so many political leaders, political thinkers that have been thinking about the Roman Empire in nostalgic terms. We had the Empire of Charlemagne that actually tried to reinvigorate the Roman Empire and recreate it. The Empire of Napoleon was also an attempt to unify Europe. But all of these historical examples are really based on conquest by force of arms. We will unite the European continent at the tip of a sword. And that's really a fundamental difference between these attempts to achieve European unity and the European Union that exists today. The foundation of the modern EU really goes back to the post-Second World War situation, the late 1940s. Of course, the Marshall Plan was important. The intense aid efforts to reconstruct Europe after the devastating Second World War. And this is the context where this dream of European unity is again addressed and revisited. So what we have here is a number of thinkers that propose deep integration of Europe as a way to ensure peace. Now, this wasn't something that came out of the will of the people of France and Germany. This was certainly an elitist project in the sense that there was a number of thinkers in think tanks and high government positions in civil service and so on that were driving this agenda. It was a top-down project in that sense. But the method chosen here was to dissolve the borders between primarily France and Germany precisely to prevent another war from happening, with the experiences of the Second World War very fresh in the minds of political leaders of the time. And what's interesting here is that Britain, France, and Germany all came out in favor of this, and that wasn't at all obvious at the time. France initially had a stance similar to the stance the French government took immediately after the First World War, an attitude towards Germany as a primary aggressor, and that punishment thus was needed. And there were even some that said that the German economy should be completely dissolved and be turned into a strictly agrarian economy to make sure that Germany could never recuperate from and become an aggressor again from the defeat of the Second World War. These attitudes could have won the day. Germany could have remained a series of occupied zones. At the time, the policy option to pick was not the obvious. There was no obvious policy solution to the issue of European peace for the future. But at the end of the day, the idea of integration won out, and the result was the European Coal and Steel Community, which established a high authority, a special council of ministers, a court of justice, and a common assembly. And these four were actually the proto-European Union, in the sense that these four institutions that were put in place to regulate these particular industries between the original member countries, which was France and Germany and the Benelux area. These institutions would later develop into the institutions that are now now make up the system of governance of the EU. Moving on to 1957 and the Treaty of Rome, this is where this community is turned into the European Economic Community, the common market and the euro at home. So you go from coal and steel to embrace a much wider range of industries and, of course, also the nuclear sector, nuclear power sector. And part of this is also the elimination of all tariffs and the creation of common external ones for over 12 to 15 years. And what that meant was free movement of goods among all the member countries. At this point also you had the High Authority renamed the Commission, which is still the name of this body of governance, and Council of Ministers becoming this organ of national governments where they come together. The national governments are represented, come together to make decision making within this framework. The European Parliament, which was the Assembly, is now the European Parliament, increased in size, and you had a European Court of Justice established firmly to regulate to oversee the functioning of the common market and the implementation of the rules regarding tariffs and trade rules. In 1965, there is another new name, the European Community, because the functions again expand, and they expand beyond just economics, beyond trade and tariffs. Now you have this common market starting to go into agricultural policy. This happens in 66. And then in 79 you get direct elections of direct popular election of members of European Parliament. And also there are these two major roadblocks that have to be addressed: the elimination of tariffs and the fact that there is little support, democratic support, for further integration. Altogether, what all these different impulses do and what they signal to the decision makers in this political system is that you can't really isolate one economic area or one policy area from another. So it starts out as only cooperation, transnational cooperation on the carbon and steel industries. And then it expands to include more and more industries as it goes along, because they're all interlinked and they're all intersecting with each other. And if you're working and cooperating in one area, you will need to be able to just efficiently manage that area. You'll have to start cooperating, discussing other areas as well. And this is so this can explain this incremental expansion of the jurisdiction of in the European community. And we can go on with this into the 1990s. This is where the Maastricht Treaty, sorry, the font got a bit messed up here. This is the Maastricht Treaty of 1991. Sorry, I'm mangling the name of this Belgian community, which created the European Union. So it's no longer the EC, it's now the EU. And this treaty established three pillars. The first which was a supranational one, again based on this origins for this cooperation, trade and economic issues, which would be creating a new level of government effectively, where the EU actually has the right to set policy above that of national governments in these issues, in these policy areas. The other two pillars were transnational justice and home affairs, which means police work, law enforcement, and so on, and transnational common foreign and security policy. So that's a foreign policy, effectively. But these are transnational, which means that you need unanimity, it's a negotiation. The EU cannot override national decision making in these two pillars the way the treaty was set up. So that remains a matter where all the national governments effectively had veto. What also happens with the treaty is an establishment of European citizenship and the principle of subsidiarity, which is that all decisions within the EU should be made at the lowest possible political level. So if the EU itself should not be handling a political issue if local or regional governments can do it better. It also committed the European Union to introduce a single currency, even though the first attempt to do so actually failed. This was also a period with a bit of a backlash. There were fewer charismatic leaders leading the charge for integrating Europe. There was a mismanagement report that effectively said that there's a lot of tax money being wasted by bad bureaucratic practices within the EU system. But these backlashes notwithstanding, there was also the attempt to create the Treaty of Nice to open the door for new enlargements and new inclusions of new members in 2004 and 7, and an attempt to create a EU constitution, which was rejected at the time. So there's this back and forth trends that we can see in the building of the European Union, where sometimes there are bursts of activity and new treaties being negotiated, followed by retrenchment, and maybe we should slow down a little bit with this project, and so on. And here's a chart of all these different treaties. You don't have to know the details of each treaty. It's more a way to illustrate how the EU goes from a fairly narrow issue of policies, fairly narrow cooperation on a fairly narrow policy field, to expand the jurisdiction of the cooperation to include more and more policy fields until we have the attempts with the Treaty of Nice and so on. Of course, now there's the Treaty of Lisbon that has not been included in this particular image, and I'll get back to that in a later video. Summarizing this experience is how we can see here how the European Union has been a matter of incremental development. So some could even say that it's been a bit ad hoc and improvisational in some sense, as political leaders discover more and more policy fields that they feel that they have to cooperate in to make the initial fields that were cooperating and that there was cooperation in more effective. Also continuous expansion. This is a trajectory from just 6 members to today 28 with the recent inclusion of Croatia. So clearly becoming a member in the European Union has historically, over the past 50 years, been very, very attractive because all of these national governments that were not initially part of the cooperation has clearly felt that becoming included in it has been a good thing. Has been seen as a good thing, at least. We can also see that that the regime, to the extent that we can talk about a regime in the European Union, it's not a country after all. It's not a confederation, even though it has confederationalist traits. The regime has been resilient in the sense that there has been no, how should I formulate this? There's been none of the treaties have been found wanting in the sense that they have been destroyed and completely revamped from the scratch up. Rather, it has been a process of adding to previous treaties, expanding those, making those more effective with each new treaty that has been added to the original framework. So it's been a matter of starting from a fairly small platform and widening this. And the present mechanisms with the Treaty of Lisbon and so on, again, it reforms previous treaties rather than revolutionizes them. And the calibration of these, this is an evolution of a framework for governance. So we can't really talk about any clear breaks in the continuity or any clear reversal until maybe the present day with the Eurozone crisis, which is probably the most formidable challenge that the European Union and this cooperation has ever had to face. Also, this is a work in progress. There is no end point in sight to any of this. It's a work in progress because leaders within the European Union, political leaders, discover that treaties need addressing, they need reform, they need to be adjusted and made more effective. And since the number of members have continually grown, the sophistication of the system of governance has continuously expanded. There is no real saying where any of this would end, if it even has an ending point. So that's a quick outline of the European Union, the political history of the European Union.